Hey everyone, it's Kirsten. Welcome to Season 3 of The Anthropocene. The scene is set. You pull up to your parking spot and take one more sip of coffee from your thermos. The day is warm, the sky is clear. Today is perfect. You walk inside and do a quick round, checking for anything urgent, and all seems well. You grab your kit and a large plastic tote with holes poked in the top, and very carefully take it back out to your vehicle. You then set out, driving along curved roads, appreciating the turtle and snake crossing signs along the way. Soon hitting gravel, you slowly and carefully drive along, trying to avoid jostling your tiny passengers. Soon you reach the trailhead and park the car. You sling your backpack over your shoulder, grab the tote, and walk about 15 minutes through tall grasses and shrubs, swaying in the light breeze until you reach the edge of the pond. Insects buzz busily in the warming sun, birds chirp away, and a fish jumps. The ripples reach your boots that are just on the edge of the water. You set the tote down and gently take out, one at a time, small little turtles, like tiny little dragons, and slowly sled them down, allowing them to scurry into the water. When the last snapping turtle is on its way back into the wild, you let out a satisfied sigh. It's days like these that make all the struggles worth it. You take one last look over the beautiful wetland and head back. There are plenty more patients to attend to. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here in your ears, ready to share some more neat nature knowledge with you. Today I have a special guest who was actually one of the first people I ever interviewed starting off my SciComm career before we even started the show way back in 2020. And I'm super thrilled to have her back. So without further ado, introducing Kim Tittergton, founder and director of Swamp Girl Adventure Reptile Rehabilitation. And in her words, which I totally love this, Swamp Girl just doing swampy things. Now, Kim, thank you so much for joining me today. Could you introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, my name is Kim, and everyone usually just calls me Swamp Girl. It's a bit easier, I think, to remember, especially in a room full of Kims. They're like, which one? Or just Swamp Girl's fine. It's much easier. But yeah, I'm a licensed wildlife rehabilitator here in Florida. I've been working with animals and wildlife and education of the public probably, I think I'm going on 28, 29 years now. So it's something I've been involved with a large majority of my life.
Wow, I actually didn't know it had been that long that you had been in this field. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Basically, I kind of start counting when I was 14. I started doing educational programs for schools. So that's when I kind of started that year back in 1994 as my official start.
Wow,
not that I didn't have
amazing.
Animal involvement and little rescues that I did with my family and stuff, those things, but as like me stepping forward. So that's when I started counting the years.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, it's been a legacy then, for sure. So coming on to that then, so you have a reptile rehabilitation center. You do a bunch of other amazing things. So what is kind of the origin story then, other than, like you were saying, since you were young, you've been doing education? Like, what got it all started for you?
So I think I was definitely, blessed with the opportunity to be born and raised in Florida, and with a pond behind my house, and with parents and a family that were, very open to learning. So if there was something that they didn't understand or they didn't know, it was always like, go to the library, go look it up in an encyclopedia, because back then we didn't have computers. You just go Google anything. So you had to go like do the bookwork. And so, it was always encouraged that, well, if you're interested in it, learn about it, and so I feel like that was definitely a good, start for me. And then I also had the advantage of across the pond in the neighborhood growing up, there was also a boy who was about my age, and his dad did educational programs for schools. So I was basically, we were like one year, together our whole lives growing up. So that opportunity to learn from him and his dad and see what he was doing helped also inspire that. And he was also one of the founders of the Herp Society in up Central Florida. And from there, I also started going to those groups at a young age and listening to the guest speakers and, looking at the reptiles. So I kind of had this passion for reptiles from the start. because I also realized at a very early age, when I was just, I think it was like second or third grade, seeing kids stomping a snake to death at a bus stop, and it really bothered me. It upset me. They were older than I was, so I wasn't able to do a whole lot about it. And so it was just like, why? And the answer is they're uneducated. They don't know. They think that these animals are going to come just chasing after you and harm you, and that they just don't understand. So I think that's what at that point really pushed me forward and has made this like my commitment in life, paid or not, no matter what it takes, like to do this. And so I guess that's kind of the origin story of where I'm still at today.
Wow, that's so amazing. It's kind of this like balance between having that love fostered and then like a little bit of the rage. I think that fuels a lot of us biologists, rehabilitators, rewilders. There's always like a little bit of
Yeah.
rage there, I think. But manifested normally in a positive way where we're trying to like make a good
Yeah,
change.
exactly. Exactly.
Right. So, I mean, as we know, there's definitely good and the bad and the ugly of wildlife careers in general and reptile rehab. So we're gonna just kind of talk a little bit about all of that today. It's extra fun. My niece Chloe, who's about 14, actually, as you were saying, you started that. She helped me. She loves reptiles, so she helped me come up with some of the
Oh,
questions for
great.
things she was interested in.
Okay.
So, yeah. So thanks for that, Punk. This is the first podcast she's gonna listen to because she's too cool for them. But she'll get into that. So first off, I'd love to just talk like some of the day in the life stuff for people that aren't familiar with reptile rehab. Because I mean, you see things with birds and mammals, but I don't think you get too much into what's happening there. So what are some of kind of the species you get most frequently then at Swamp Girl?
Yeah, so typically it's turtles and tortoises. And of course, I think that's pretty easy to explain why. And it's because that's probably out of all the reptiles, are the ones that people are more likely to not fear or feel more compassion for when they see them. So I think that's probably why we get them the most. We do get a decent amount of snakes. So we will get snakes and then some frogs and lizards and stuff too. But yeah, I would say turtles and tortoises are what we get the most in rehab.
Right, that makes sense. So not necessarily that they're the most getting into trouble, but people are willing to call in or bring them in because they're not, worried about or scared of turtles or they care about them.
Yeah. And then I think another factor too with them is, they, in a sense, they are a bit more vulnerable, especially females out nesting. So they're having to cross roadways. And the more we build the roadways, the more fragmentation of our environments and our natural habitats, they're going to end up in that position a lot more often. So I think it's noticed more frequently because they are in those situations. And then with our gopher tortoises, land and people moving in and things like that, the impact. So I think that's also plays a big role in why we see those the most.
Right. For anybody that doesn't know what a gopher tortoise is, they're super neat. Could you tell us a little bit about them? I did an article at one point. I'll link it below just in case, but you have a bunch of good info on your site too.
Yeah. No, gopher tortoises are Florida's only native tortoise species. We do have a few exotics that show up here and there, but gopher tortoises are the only ones. And they are a keystone species. So their burrows and their homes are home to like 350 to 400 other documented species. And so, basically a lot of people don't realize without them, we had the potential of losing all those other species or impacting all those other species quite a bit. And one of the things that I know a lot of people are like, what really is that the burrowing owl really benefits from gopher tortoises and will use their old burrows or abandoned burrows to make their own as nests and hiding grounds and everything. So it's really, and they're also, I think, a federally listed species, I believe, but I know they're definitely protected. And so it just kind of correlates together how special the gopher tortoises are and what they mean to, our environment and other species. And they're herbivores.
Yeah.
That's another thing. I'm like, they're not going to eat your dog. So I always try to make sure people know that, they're herbivores. They eat mostly just plant matter.
Are there people worried about tortoises eating their
Yeah.
animals? Is that a thing?
No, big time.
Oh
Yeah, people who
my.
move here, they're like, I
Okay.
don't. If there's a hole in the yard, and then they don't like the hole. They're like, it's unsightly. I want to fill it
Ah,
in, and then they're like, oh well, I have kids and I have dogs, and they're like, I don't want it hurting. And I'm like, well, it's not. I said it's more or less the other way around. I'm more concerned for the tortoise being hurt by your dog or by your kids than the animal.
right.
So yeah, but that happens a lot where there's this huge concern because there's an animal in their yard, so yeah.
Right. You just have this like vorpal, like gopher tortoise that's out like eating
Yeah.
pets and stuff. Yes. Gopher tortoises are herbivores. They're not going to hurt you. I do kind of get, I guess, initially, if you move somewhere and don't understand the wildlife, like just seeing a large burrow, you're like, what could be
Yeah.
in there? But I guess this is where the education is so important, where you're like, hey, we have these tortoises that burrow. That is so cool to start
Mm-hmm.
with. And then provide these homes to all these different animals. Yeah, for those who didn't know, burrowing animals or burrowing owls are like lazy little shits and pretty much never actually create their own burrows. They pretty much steal it from somebody else. So if you like owls, you got to keep the tortoises
That's
too.
right. Go hand in hand.
That's crazy. Well, neat. I didn't ever think people were. Yeah, I guess you always get surprised, right? With
Yeah.
with mythology and lore and what goes around and what people don't understand. But that's what we're here for.
Exactly. Very true.
Cool. So in your rehab at a time, how many animals on average do you have at one time that you're helping?
It's kind of seasonal. So we do have those,
Right.
fluctuations. And I think at the lowest, like right now, we're in our lowest time of year for intakes, is probably around 30 to 40 in care. Um, and that can also fluctuate depending on how crazy of a fall season we had coming into the more winter,
Right.
because there's a lot of these guys, we can't release them during the winter. So if we can't get them well enough before, then we also get kind of stuck with them for the winter. And even though it's Florida, that sounds crazy. It's like, well, there's no snow on the ground, but like a tortoise, for example, doesn't have a known burrow. We know their estimated location, but we don't know what their burrow is like after a couple months in care. So if we release them, we can't put them out where the afternoon high is only like 55 or 60 degrees, and then they're cold. They can freeze and become sick or stressed. So it's not fair to them to do that. But so we have to kind of wait for those appropriate release windows.
Right. Yeah. So.
But yeah, and then at our max, I think I've had over 100 in care easily at a time, and especially if I start to count like hatchlings or babies. I have one case that came in that it was a missed shipment that had almost 400 baby turtles. So what I had in care plus what I already had in care probably sounded a lot crazier than it looked, because they're all babies, but still they were a responsibility. So at that point we had probably close to 500 in care at once, accounting the babies. So yeah, that's sometimes it can go up quite a bit, especially once we hit spring, summer, and into fall is our craziest times.
Right. That makes sense. And how many of you are there? I'm sure like volunteers and stuff fluctuate as well, but what does your team look like for normally?
I kind of cover probably the majority of everything. So I kind of, but then we basically, both my daughters help whenever they can, and then we had Charles helps whenever he can. So and then we also have Brent who volunteers, and he's done some pickup and transport. But yeah, it's a very small team. It's mostly family run, but it's a small team. We're hoping to grow that team though in the future, as we get more. So.
Right, makes sense. That is a lot of work for one person and the family that can when they're able to come help.
Yeah.
So yeah, congratulations. Good work. We're all very proud of you.
That's a lot.
So other than car strikes, which is a big, huge thing for turtles, and I mean all the other different reptiles, what are some of the most common issues for the reptiles in Florida, in your region?
Well, unfortunately, dog interactions, so dog bites and chews are going to be the next on the list. So they're almost equal. So starting in, I want to say 2020, 2021, I think, is when we really started, because Florida, people were moving to Florida at just like crazy numbers after COVID. And we had this huge influx of gopher tortoises. It was our record year for getting them in. And a lot of those cases were dog interactions because people were moving here with their pets. And then they're, obviously not, they didn't know that there's tortoises there, or they didn't care. I'm not sure which, it depends. But, we're having big problems with that. So dogs and cars are definitely on the top of the list. And then from there, we end up with the disease. So disease is another issue that has been affecting a lot of even our aquatics and snakes. Like almost everything has some kind of disease factor that we are alerted to and are looking out for. And then at the bottom of the list, thankfully, it's at the bottom of the list, but it still happens, is like cruelty cases, or, captive neglect, as we call it, where someone intended on keeping the animal because they were rescuing it because it was, crossing a sidewalk to try to get to the pond, and instead they kept it, or, whichever. So, we also have those cases that come in. So that's the majority of filling the gap.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah. People, I know you love the wildlife, but if you're not a licensed rehabber, you're not helping.
Yeah.
Call somebody.
Yeah. A lot of those animals come to us in really poor condition, because even in the pet trade, people try to give us stuff from, metabolic bone disease and all these other issues. And I'm like, oh my gosh, but the same thing happens when they, take them from the wild too. They same come with metabolic bone disease and other disease factors or health issues. So.
Right, for sure. Do your research properly if you're going to have a reptile. They're a lot more work than people usually think. Because I think you kind of think, oh, it's this like cute little thing that stays in its terrarium, but they need so many nutrients and they need a lot more space than people give them.
It is. There's a lot to it. And it's funny when a lot of people ask me like, well, what should I buy? What should I need? And I start listing off things and they're like, well, that's really expensive. And I'm like, yeah, unfortunately, you're basically trying to, simulate the outdoors and their nutrition and everything and their natural environment to really give them the best potential. There's really no getting around that. It just kind of has to be done. So,
right. When you get animals that were pets, what does the rehab process look like that? Because I assume you're not releasing them afterwards.
Right. So
or how is that working?
There's some different factors that play into that. Some of them do have potential for us to release them.
Okay.
So if the animal originally came from the wild, so we always ask the story, like, okay, what's the background? So if it came from the wild, they had it for a couple years. And even if it's like got some mild nutritional issues, but it's still like we can rehab them and get them back up and going and get them wild. So we'll simulate a wild environment in an outdoor pond with their natural foods. We hands off, so that we can watch for them. If they're up on their, basking and we come up and they're gone, they shoot off. That's what we want. We don't want them interacting with us. We want them wild. So once we check all of those boxes, then they have the potential of being released. Now, factors that we do take into consideration is if they were with other exotic species, then we have to watch for other transfer of like parasites or diseases that they may not be showing, but they could be there. So we have to do more health checks before we feel comfortable releasing them. And then other factors is if they're just completely like they're just not responding to a wild environment very well, then we may have to make them non-releasable. But we've had gopher tortoises as well as aquatic turtles that have come to us that people, had as pets or collected from the wild, but we were able to return them. And if we can get them back where they came from, I've had it where they've had it like baby for like a year or two. And they're like, well, it's my backyard pond. And I was like, well, get it to us. We'll get them rehabbed and wild, and then we'll return them back to the lake that they came from in the first place. So then that way if there is any potential of spreading something, we got them back in their same home range as, would have been intended before. So, but yeah.
Cool. Excellent. This might sound very ignorant, but are there vaccines for reptiles of any
Not
kind?
that I know of. I know some talk has been around with some of the viruses to see if there's something, but I don't know really how much study or how much has gone into that. I think there's potential for it, but it's nothing that I have been aware of or have access to myself to do. And if I did, I definitely would use it. So.
Right. No, it's just something that popped into my head now. I was like, can you give them any kind of like vaccines to prevent that stuff? But it's such an understudied group of organisms, right? So it's something that I'm sure is a potential in the future, but it's just
There was talk about it for the turtle
yeah.
Fraser virus. I know that there was some like, hey, maybe there
Okay.
could be something that, we could use that way. It was for, viruses in particular. So that would be beneficial. But, I don't know that anything has come of that. It was just talk, but I don't know if anything related to it has ever sprung up either.
Okay. So yeah, we've talked a little bit. There's a lot of like fluctuation seasonally in what you're doing and how many animals you have. But what does a day in the life kind of look like for you other than crazy? Because we can see you have a lot going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, usually a typical day, wake up, first thing is try to get coffee. Whether or not any food is involved until dinner time usually depends on how my day goes. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I skip everything until, and then dinner happens when it happens. But yeah, usually the first parts of the day is, a lot of times I'll get woke up with phone calls, like if, with emergency calls and things that are concerns. So dealing with that day to day, and then mixed in there, is it our meds day? Is it, pond cleaning days, and all of those different factors. And I try to get started with stuff that I know has to be done immediately, because I never know what the day is going to unfold like. Sometimes I can predict it a little with the weather changes. I'm like, oh no, we had this rain front come in. We're going to get to this humidity. That means that snapping turtles are out today, or this, I almost start to kind of anticipate the load, and what season we're in by some of the phone calls too. But yeah, I mean, so it comes down to bandage changes, medications, wound care, cleaning. Like I said, then their habitat, or they're what I call their little hospital beds or bins. Maintaining and cleaning and all of those things, and checking on everybody is part of that main routine. And then of course, feeding it with anyone who needs their food, and water changes and such. So, and yeah, like I said, and then the other days I try to plan out, if I can, is what we call release days. And I try to clump multiple animals at a time into those release days.
Yeah.
So, and because we cover like 28 counties on average in the state of Florida, some of those release sites are a couple hours away. So if I get multiple animals from that area, I try to wait for a good day that I can travel and take that time away from the day to go do those things, release them, and then come back. So some of the days during the weeks are also include those kind of things.
Okay, so if you love reptiles and cannot sit still for more than 5 seconds, this career could be for you.
Yeah, because it's more of an undertaking, I think, than most people realize. And I think I get a lot of animals from other rehabbers. So, they're really good at little birds and the little fuzzy animals and, mammals and such. But, when it comes to the reptiles, it's like a whole new world on what you can give them, and what their needs are really different. And a lot of rehabbers don't even have those supplies or access to those meds, because almost everything has to be injectable. You can't just like, oh, let me give you a pill. It's like everything has to be injectable. So that's something else that gets very expensive. And so that's a lot of rehabbers are like, no, that's just too expensive to have to keep all those kind of drugs and stuff on hand that are injectable.
Right. Yeah. So anybody listening, I mean, if you want to check out some of the process, you do a great job on your Instagram of showing, some of the ways that you take in animals and you treat them. But I'd love to hear, is there any like cool technology that's relatively new that you're able to use in your rehab other than, the day-to-day stuff?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like is like the cold laser. I feel is a really good tool that's been very helpful in helping promote healing in the reptiles. Okay. So very non-invasive, and something that's very useful tool. So I feel like that's something that's been a good add. One of my favorite things is always X-ray and ultrasound. I think the ultrasound is a lot of fun, and it was one of the first things. I got an ultrasound before I got X-ray, and the ultrasound was what we used to see if females had eggs. so that when they came in for care, we knew to be prepared for that animal if, she needed help with her eggs or not. So that was a great thing to be able to use that resource and know within seconds whether or not we were dealing with that. And then the x-ray machine is always just so cool. It's just really cool.
Yeah,
And it's a great,
amazing.
great way of really assessing, obviously fractures, but even sometimes impactions or foreign objects, fish hooks, all of those things. The x-ray really, without it, I don't know what I would do. You just guess. That's pretty much it.
Right. Pretty hard to diagnose if you can't see what's going on.
It's like, okay, symptoms might be, but then you look and you're like, oh, wow, okay, wasn't prepared for that one. You can find some interesting things that way. Some of the other things that I find are really good tools is just having an in-house blood chemistry, machine and analyzer. I test for lead in-house as well. So I do lead tests on them. And let's see, some other stuff. I think that's some of, typically we use microscopes and but the newest, more techie stuff, I think would probably be, like I said, the cold laser is probably one of the more things that's coming up and people are using a lot more frequently now.
Right. Could you elaborate just a tiny bit more on like what that is and how you use it? Because I think I have an idea about it.
Yeah. So basically it's kind of like this red beam of light, and, there's different settings for what you're trying to do. So even if it's like a fracture, like you're trying to help heal bone, something more dense, which with our turtles and tortoises, that's a lot of times what we're healing is their carapace or their plastron. So using that helps stimulate the blood flow and the growth of the tissue. So it stimulates and it helps to heal faster. And in areas that, like I have a loggerhead musk turtle that literally had a major infection on his shell after being bit by something. And I've been using the laser, and it helps those tissues harden and firm and grow a little faster to help fill in that void. And it's been really beneficial. You can see that the tissues look kind of pale, and then after you use it, they're a little bit more pink and fresh looking. So that it's doing it. It's helping to increase that. So it really kind of increases healing time and helps with areas that might be more of a like dead zone where there's could have had or will get necrotic tissue. So this way here, we're trying to prevent that or help, get rid of the necrotic tissue and have healthier tissues underneath.
Right. That's cool. That's like like cold therapy then for reptiles for so many different things. That's incredible. Great.
Yeah.
Good. I'm sure that helps so much.
It does. And like I said, it's pain-free, and it's something that you can do pretty easily for them without having to be too invasive, which is nice, stress-free for both ends.
Excellent.
And then I think the only other thing, I wouldn't call it techie, but the hooks and wires is a newer method that I try to encourage people to use instead of drilling the holes to reduce or stabilize fractures. Little screws in and then wire it together. Some would use like epoxies or fiberglass, and those are all actually very invasive, time-consuming, and dangerous things to be using. So the hook and wire method is a non-invasive thing to use that I have had a lot of success with, and I also teach how to do it at different seminars and programs. So.
Right. So that's when a shell is broken, like from like a impact or a bite or something, and you're just like helping it, like holding it together so it can regrow.
Exactly. So like if you have like a shift or a fractured space, then we want to bring it together and we want it to hold there, so that just like with a person's bones, you want to line it up and you let it heal back together. And that's pretty much what we're doing, is we need to stabilize them. And the hooks and wire method is just a far easier, faster way of doing it. And when they're ready to go, you just pop them off and they can be released right away instead of having to worry about little holes healing from screws or going too deep or things rusting, and that's all in bone, like you're screwing that into live tissue. So it's like, we don't want to do that. If you can avoid doing that, this is a way of doing that.
Right. I think with turtles and tortoises, we kind of have this like disconnect that the shell is like just a bone on the outside. And I think, the first time you ever see inside a shell and you see the little spine, like is attached to that. We kind of have this cartoony sort of disconnect, I think, that the turtles and tortoises are just like hanging out inside a shell, but that's just part of their body.
It is. And it's crazy because I've had people call me and say, I found a turtle with a broken shell. Do you have new ones?
Oh no.
Yeah, I've actually had that happen. And I was like, well, they're not like hermit crabs. you need to bring like the whole animal in. I need to like, I don't just carry shells as a rehabber to hand off to you to replace. So yeah, it's crazy, but I still get that. I still get those kind of calls where people don't realize that it's all attached.
Right. That would make your life a hell of a
Oh,
lot
that's
easier, I assume, if you could just like throw down another shell and they just pop right in.
There you go. We're good. You're good to go, buddy. Just try to avoid the car next time. We'll have to, charge the insurance.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's all just about learning and yeah, better education from and about these kind of, unloved groups and things that we just like don't understand that much about.
Exactly.
So I just kind of as a feel-good thing, do you have any anecdotes about some like miraculous recovery story or something cool to share with us about a rehab story?
Yeah, I probably have quite a few in the reptile world that,
Okay.
you look at them and it's like, you've got to be kidding me. How are you still alive? And, it's just one of those things that, I mean, there's quite a few of them that I'll look at it and go, okay, I feel like you have a chance, when other people are like, there is no way, and I'll still get them to come around. But, one I had was a gopher tortoise that basically her rear, over near the whole pelvic side was, a car had basically just caught the side of it. So it fractured all of that and it was just hanging off. So all those bone fragments were pretty much shattered, and you could actually see the membrane and muscle and everything underneath that was there. So it was a very, very traumatic injury, but there was no physical damage to the pelvis or the spine or any of the vital organs. So even though you could kind of look in and almost see where her kidneys would be, like it was pretty rough, everything was stable other than the bone that was obviously fractured.
Okay.
And so I basically removed all the dead fragments, and we use honey a lot. So we do use injectable antibiotics, but as topical healing aids, we do use honey and honey bandages and a lot of that stuff. So we started that and got, had her on antibiotics and everything, fluids, pain meds, all of that. And it took about 12 weeks, but it started to shrink up and then firm up and heal over. And just watching, I actually have it in one of my PowerPoints as kind of like a save of the year kind of thing that I show people step by step, like day 1 to release day. And even though there's this large portion kind of missing in the back, it is firm tissue, and she's able to walk, and she just has a story to tell, basically, is what I always say. I'm like, sometimes things don't look pretty, but that doesn't mean that they should just die because it doesn't look pretty. That's just how we are perceiving it. But them as animals, they're like, I can still make babies. I can still, play a role in the ecosystem. So just because I have some scars or something looks a little rough doesn't mean that they don't deserve another chance. So I always look at it as long as they are capable of living and continuing and thriving with even stuff that looks rough, then they deserve to go back. And this is one of those cases. I mean, I think it actually healed very pretty on that, considering, but especially when you see it from the beginning. But it's like, it was just incredible to watch her go back to her burrow. We actually knew where her burrow was. It was near a roadside, go figure, which is kind of scary. I'm like, okay, but she knew right where it was, and she was happy to go right in it. And it was like, she started eating the grass around it. She knew she was home, and it was like the success of, wow, that was pretty incredible that she made it that far. It looked pretty rough. So
that is incredible. I mean, reptiles are super hardy and resilient animals in the first place, but they just need to be given the chance to heal up. Right?
Yeah, and it does take time. I think that's the other thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that it's not like it's going to be healed up in a week or two. I mean, if it's a minor scuff, of course, but some of these major injuries can take a full 6 months before we can feel like they are strong enough to get back out there. So, and sometimes even longer, depending on the situation.
Right. Well, you're healing this massive bone, like if it has to do with the shells and things inside. So it's kind of like like the closest I can think of is like thinking if your skull was cracked, like, you know, that's relatively close
No,
probably.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. It's, you know, it's a major, like if you got into a major accident and, you know, all that healing time, and then even sometimes physical therapy thereafter, if you think of how long all of that takes, even for a person, you know, it's kind of the same for them.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that is a great story. It's always cool to hear, you know, these things where it's easy to just give up and say they're not going to make it. But what if you just try?
Yeah. And I'm glad I did. And it just,
Yeah.
it makes you feel better. It's like, you know, what you're doing is worth it. All this time and effort and energy.
Right.
It's worth it.
Good. Yeah. It ends up being worth it in the end. That's great. Do you have any like funny anecdotes for us? Something that's happened to you in the field that would be like your cocktail party story?
I'm trying to think of one of those. I know, I mean, sometimes a lot of it comes back to almost like when they, like the people who call me thinking that, oh, they just need a new shell, kind of thing. Like, do you carry shells? So there was a guy who had a softshell turtle that was at his front sliding door, and he was from New Jersey. And I asked him, I said, you know, it's okay. Just let her, it was egg nesting season. I was like, she's probably looking for a place to do a nest. And I was like, has your house been built within the last year? And he's like, yeah, it was just fresh build. And then we moved into it. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, you know, she probably nested in that area and your house is sitting where she usually puts her eggs. So I was like, give her some time. And he's like, well, I don't know about that. And I was like, well, if you don't want to wait, I was like, I can guide you to help just move her like into a bin or a box and around the side of your house so she's not sitting at your sliding glass door. And he's like, oh, I'm not going outside.
Right.
He's like, I'm not going outside. He's like, I'm not even used to these little lizards that are running around here. And of course, my response was, just wait till the big lizard ends up. The alligator shows up. I was like, then you can talk to me about being worried. But yeah, so he was really freaking out, and he was almost an hour from me. And so it got to the point where he kept calling and saying, please, somebody, he's like, he got really upset. He said, you know, the government should be paying for this, and you know, there's people out there who can do this. I know it. Like, and back in New Jersey, this wouldn't be a problem. I just make a phone call and it's gone. You know, just stuff like that. Like, he was starting to get nasty, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to show up, little old me, and just walk up and just pick up this thing because this guy can't even go out of his house, you know. And then finally he called me and said, okay. She moved off, and I was like, oh, thank goodness. But I just, it's so amusing to me how, it's like, he's like, I'm not even used to these little lizards running around. I'm like, then why did you move to Florida? This is the least of your worries. Trust me. The little lizards. So.
Right. Oh boy. Yeah. You get these like little city kids like moving out also to like, he was probably like relatively countryside, and then, do you not know what Florida is? Like,
I was like, I feel like we need to give like a little safety pamphlet or a awareness pamphlet of like, before deciding to move to Florida, there is this. And I know there's a lot of memes and stuff out there about that, which I think is just hilarious.
Right.
You know, but yeah, I think that was one that I kind of thought was kind of funny and silly. I'm trying to think if there was something else in particular that was more, I have had some funny moments where an animal will escape the bin. I had a snapping turtle that I was transporting for release, and he had gotten out of the bin in the back while I was going down the highway. And all I see is out of the corner of my eye between the seats, this snapping turtle pacing the back seat, going back and forth, then climbing up over. And then I see in the rearview mirror, I see this head like looking. I'm like, he's going over the back seat. I'm like, this is like wandering the car. And I was like, okay, just wait till I pull over. Please just don't crawl under my feet, you know? But so I've had a few of those instances where they just escaped the container. And then I'm like, what are you doing? Hold on.
Well, this turtle, I was like, I want to ride in the front with you. Like,
yeah. So some of those moments, I guess, are probably, especially if they get under your feet. I've had two situations where they've gotten out and then they go under the seat. And one was a soft shell. So I'm just like trying to pull off and put my foot on the brake, but not have my foot, you know, I was wearing sandals. So I'm like, please, I don't want to put my foot in front of the soft shell's face. And that'd be a whole nother situation. But sometimes, you know, anytime someone's transporting something, I'm always like, make sure there is a secure lid. Do not do what I do. Learn from my mistakes. Don't get lazy, put the lid
Right.
on the box. Injured or not, they can be escape
Right.
artists. So,
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. No, that is good. And I just keep going back to the guy, like, worried, like, soft shells look so derpy and like they're just little guys.
Yeah.
Like, I guess you're just not used
Well,
to it.
and same with
But oh
the,
man.
I get people who are like, there's a snapping turtle in my yard, and then they send me a picture of a gopher tortoise. You know, that happens a lot too.
Right.
Everything's a snapping
Right.
turtle.
Well, I mean, first off, you don't actually have to be worried about snapping turtles. And then, yeah, like it's a little gopher tortoise. Like, okay, everyone who's listening to this, go and Google yourself a little gopher tortoise. They are just the sweetest little
Yeah.
boys. They have the greatest
Yep.
little face.
Yep. Their main
Yeah.
defense is they may pee or poop
Okay.
on you. Like literally, that's it.
Right.
That's all they got.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, we keep working towards the education.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. So, I just kind of like back to the rehab thing a little bit as a little aside. Our origin story here on the podcast was a bit about invasive species, and I'm just a bit curious about what you do when you're encountering what are considered invasive species in your work. I know this might be a little bit doomy and gloomy, but something that's important to talk
Yeah,
about.
and being in Florida, the invasive species capital of the world, it is something that I think no matter what you rehab, you probably come across, from birds, mammals to reptiles. So it is a common problem here, and one of the biggest ones we have is the red ear sliders. And because they'll move out and get hit by cars just like any other female, doing the same thing. So we go through seasons where we get a lot of them, coming in. And what's really frustrating is that, we'll have people who really just like, it's pulling at their heartstrings. They want to see this animal live. And I have to, I'm one of those people who's usually pretty upfront and honest about it, and because it's just the fact that they really need to be euthanized, and I do explain why. And because I did try, sometimes I'll try to rehome them or, and stuff, but there's just not enough homes. That's the problem. And the zoos are full. They require permits to even have as a pet. So I can't even just like give it to someone who just says, hey, I'll take it. Like they have to go through the permitting process if they're interested in this adoption. So there's so much red tape. It makes it harder to place them. And anyone who does have it, like I said, is usually already full. And it kills me because I hate to do that. It's not their fault that they are an invasive species and prohibited in the state of Florida. That's a people problem, not the animals problem, but the animals ultimately pay that price. And we're also seeing that with the iguanas. I have to just basically say no. They have to contact FWC because under our permitting as a wildlife rehabber, we're not to take them. We just can't. Yeah. So I technically even, and I guess if we did, we would just have to euthanize. And because I'm like, I don't want to have to do that. So I usually just I give them places they can go with that animal for that purpose. And it's not easy. But it's something that happens. Now, if it's something like, say, that's a little more rare, like I've had painted turtles and Mississippi map turtles come in. I've had the redfoot tortoises and cicadas and Russians. Oh my gosh, the Russian tortoises last year was crazy. I had so many phone calls about people finding them, not necessarily injured, just finding them. They're just like randomly, like around apartment complexes and housing developments and parks. Like they were just showing up like crazy last year. But those guys, we can usually bring them in and get them placement much easier because they're not listed in Florida. So that's where those changes are for us. Like if they're not listed, then we can place them in a home or adopt them out somewhere. Whereas the ones that are under some kind of guideline or permitting or being prohibited, then it's different. Like our hands are kind of forced to do what we don't necessarily want to, but have to.
Right. I know it's super difficult, but yeah, it is part of protecting the other species, though, that you're working so hard to save, is also, unfortunately, like doing what we can to eradicate like the invasive species and
and if the answer was they all had a home to go to instead of going back to the wild, I would take that. But in reality, the reality is that there isn't enough places or homes for those. So.
Right. Right. So I don't know if that's the answer to the question though too, but you know, back to just rehab in general. What is like one of the hardest, most frustrating parts of the work in
Actually
general?
dealing with the people. Is it
Right.
really is, and it can be anywhere from where you have like a child that was with their mom and they're crying, or even I've had people come to me and like they're like in tears, you know, because this animal is hurt, and then you have the
Mm-hmm.
complete opposite of this thing's bleeding by my mailbox, come get it, I'm not touching it, I'm not, you know,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. I've had people literally bring, because on our form we have like a little thing that says, you know, help us help them, would you like to donate, when they fill out like where they found the animal and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people straight up tell me, you don't need a donation for a reptile. And I'm like, would you like to see the bills that come after this, you know? um, so you know, I think
Right.
dealing with the people can be, whether it's emotional so that you're trying to be supportive, and especially when you know that this one's not going to make it and they're all hopeful to you, like,
Mm-hmm.
please fix them. I'm like, in some cases, I think what's nice in those is when I get a female, because I'm like, okay, you know, she's got eggs, and if she doesn't make it, we will save her baby. So it
Mm-hmm.
was worth your hour drive to me and the stress you were under. You know, it's like that
Right.
silver lining. But otherwise, you know, I think it's upsetting just in a different way. You get someone who's just really mean and nasty, and you're just like, really, you know, come on, we're trying to save these animals. And then you have those who are just really hurting because of what happened, and you're like, I'm so sorry. You know, you feel really bad. So handling those waves, and one phone call could be one way, and then 5 minutes later, you got a phone call with somebody in a completely different mental state, you know, and so it kind of throws you into a
Right.
different mental state. You're almost like crying with one person, and then you're like ready to strangle someone through the phone on the next, and it's like, you know, it's draining. It's very draining dealing with the people, no
Right.
matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would, for me, is the hardest part, other than just making sure we have the funding and the space to continue doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's the worst part
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, that sounds like so much. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions. Like people probably also have it. This isn't an excuse to be a dick, but like they probably have it in your head that, you know, maybe that you're a government organization or you're funded municipality. So that's, you know, part of the like, you don't need donations for this, or like, come pick up this shit. Like they're thinking you're like animal control,
Yes.
sort of, which doesn't mean you need to be a jerk,
Yeah.
but, you know, there's so much misconceptions around like the work that you're doing is, you know, because you want to make a
Yes.
difference.
Yeah. And I do
So,
find myself
yeah.
explaining that a lot, that, you know, like FWC does not fund us. They regulate us, but they don't give us the
Yeah.
funding to do what we're
Yeah.
doing. And a lot of us
Right.
don't have a large volunteer pool. So like if they're an hour from me, they're like, well, why can't you just come
Mm-hmm.
pick it up? I'm like, well, I have 100 other animals in care right now. I can't just leave those animals in care to drive
Right.
and, you know, out and then get another one who's then going to need a whole set of care as well to add to the load. So, you know, I'm like, that's all we ask. Even if you don't give a donation, at least help get them to us, you know,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it's a lot. Even just picking them up, it can be a lot.
I did forget to ask this properly. Where are you in Florida? Because Florida's not
Yes.
tiny either.
Well, in Central Florida, kind of closer to the Disney area. So we're kind of very centralized into the
Okay.
center of the state, which is very beneficial
Mm-hmm.
since we, like I said, we cover 28 counties. So even though we're kind of near the Disney area and centralized, you know, we still get animals, like I said, from a couple hours away, from North Florida into like High Springs, even up down to Miami and Naples.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've had animals come in from for care, especially special cases. So it's a lot of ground to cover.
Okay. Great. Cool. Yeah. I know we've been talking about a lot about the negative, but do you accept volunteers or people that are like, you know, internshipping and then like wanting to like give this trial a run? Are you set up for that
Not
yet?
yet,
Or
but it's
okay.
in the future, because that is something I want so bad.
Okay.
Is I want more community involvement. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's how we can educate
Yeah.
more, and also, you know, like I said, internships and stuff for college students. There's something called Green Volunteer I'd love to become a part of, because then we can actually
Okay.
accept people from even other countries as well as other states who might have a reptile interest and would benefit this from their schooling to actually work with us for a week or so and actually stay on site. So that's something called Green Volunteer.
Yeah.
So we'd like to do stuff like that as well. But, you know, and underprivileged children, giving them opportunities of involvement. So those are all things we want to do. The problem is that we haven't we don't have enough funding yet to purchase a property. Like we're looking, we're seeking. We've been
Right.
we worked with we've got a couple different realtors on the job, actually, kind of trying to find the right fit. And we're still fundraising, so we're either looking for a landowner or just enough donations. Either way, it's all going to go into that facility build, and so then at that point we can expand and definitely accept a lot more volunteers. Otherwise, what we are accepting for volunteers right now are if you're interested in being a board member and you have a special skill that, you know, maybe with accounting or something, writing grants, you know, any of those kind of special skills, even if you are not in Florida, but you might be a grant writer in another state, like those can still benefit us and help us where we are. Because we definitely need that kind of help. And then also local people who might be in a lot of the cities that we need help with transport. So those people who aren't willing to drive the animals, we may need a transport volunteer. Or if the animals go to a vet clinic that is one of our hubs that is a drop-off point, we may need to have someone pick up from the clinic and then get closer to us. So transport volunteers, then like I said, board members with special skills are kind of what we can do now. But the future, hopefully a lot more.
Great. Okay, stay tuned. Definitely follow on Instagram. All the links will be below for that for sure. Kind of to like upswing the mood a little bit here too. What do you think is the best part of this job amidst all the hard work?
The best part is, for me, it's a little bittersweet, but the releases are definitely good. I mean, there's times where when I say bittersweet, it's like, you know, hopefully they won't get hit again or they won't get injured again. You know, you always worry about that. You're like, okay, it's like sending your child off. It's like, all right, there's the big world again. Right. I hope I taught you well. So, you know, that, but at the same time, it's so nice to see them. Like they know when they're getting closer to home and that wild, they get very excited, they get anxious, and you put them on the ground and they're just like, yeah, you know, they're ready to go. And it's like, okay, I did my job, you know? And I think that, and I think the other thing that's just really fun and a great thing is the babies. You know, so when the females come in and we get the eggs, we recover the eggs, then we hatch them out, and then we have like hundreds of babies, and we'll do special little baby release days, and we invite. Usually, I have like a list I'll make of children who like accompanied their parents when rescuing a turtle, and whether it was a female with eggs or not, just because I like to get the youth involved. So I'll make a list when we have enough babies collected together. I invite them to a baby turtle release day where they can help put them back in the wild, so they kind of connect the rescue and release part of things. So I think those are always fun days. I always enjoy those and watching the kids get excited about the little baby turtles swimming off. So.
Right. That's so great. I always have like a silly question for my guests, and this one I'm going to be mean and ask you which is the cutest baby reptile, and you have to pick one.
Oh no! Oh gosh. You know, I feel like the snapping turtles are the cutest, I guess, in my mind, but a close second is the soft shells because they're cute little tiny pointy noses. And I think the one thing I like about the soft shells is that they love to bury themselves in the sand. So the moment you put them in the water and they touch sand, they do that whole little like down in there. You get a little
like
wiggle,
wiggle.
In the sand, and then they pop their head up like and just that. I love that. Like, so it's kind of a tie between, I don't know if I had to pick one. Those two are probably my heart melters.
That's a fair answer. Is there an ugliest baby reptile?
No.
Because, you know, like baby birds are ugly, for example.
No, you know, I think that's the one thing about reptiles, as far as I'm concerned, is I don't think there's an ugly baby. Like literally all of them come out with either really vibrant, unique colors, and then they might dull as adults. So sometimes they're actually better looking as babies just because their colors and, you know, and patterns that will dull down later. So, I don't know that. I'm trying to think of one. I mean, even tadpoles are kind of cute in the amphibian world. So I'm like,
right. They're all beautiful. That's the answer.
They are.
Yeah.
And even the little snakes and stuff. Yeah, no, I don't know. I can't pick one that would be an ugly baby. No.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's fair. That's a fair enough answer. I already made you pick the cutest one, which is a betrayal
I
to all
know.
your little
I love
babies
you
anyway.
all, I swear.
That's amazing. So just kind of to wrap up, if people are interested in getting into working with rehabilitation, like what is like one piece or a couple pieces of advice that you could give them just to get
I
started?
think the biggest piece of advice is learning how this world works in the rehab world. Like, so volunteering with other rehabbers, and getting those experiences is really important because it is a lifestyle commitment. I think that's where everyone
Right.
has to realize it, because not just myself but also my family had to sacrifice what would probably be typical normal family life, or having family normal things. It's like the kitchen isn't just the kitchen, the living room's not just the living room, things like that. Going to the park, it may not be a typical day at the park, whether it's I'm getting emergency calls or maybe I'm releasing an animal on the way. I'm like, oh, you need to go over into Orlando. Okay, where? Because I have a turtle that needs to go back. And like everything is involved and wrapped into every moment. So having those free moments is very rare. So it's definitely a lifestyle. And I think that's the biggest thing I can try to explain to people. And it's not just with reptiles, but any rehab in general. It is a lifestyle. Unless you work in more of a clinic environment, then you can think of it more like a veterinarian who can walk away at the end of the day and say, I turn off my phone, But as a rehabber, we really can't. It's 24/7. We live it, basically. So,
Right. Yeah, there is no 9 to 5. It's not really glamorous. It's very rewarding, but very much a huge commitment.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken in animals at midnight.
Okay.
So right when I want to go to bed, I'm like, all right, I'll just wait up a little longer, bring it in, take care of it, get it stabilized, and then go to sleep and start the whole next day all over again.
Right. That's that's a lot of work. Before we kind of wrap up, is there any like current specific fundraisers for everyone to know about? Like you have a donation thing on your page, but is there something specific that you want to shout out?
Yeah, so kind of like I was talking about before with having the volunteers in the facility, if you go to our website and you look at Rakora, we have Operation Rakora, and that's basically our fundraiser to help build that facility. So that is something that we definitely, anybody who wants to contribute to it, we have a little meter on it that's kind of showing where we're at and where our ultimate goal would be.
Yeah.
So that's our current and ongoing, like long ongoing fundraiser right now that's out there. Otherwise, we are fundraising for some smaller things. I'm trying to find some sponsorship for some of my research and travels to help cover costs of the research and travels, and research stuff. But other than that, that's our main one, is the Operation Rakora.
Great. Very cool. Well, I know you have a bunch of other like research projects and stuff going on, but I think we've kind of mentioned that we're going to come back for episode 2. So kind of stay tuned for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about, these other research projects that you have going on with Swamp Girl. And because, I got a couple papers coming out, I think.
Working on, we got some stuff really coming up. Yep, definitely. Some exciting stuff.
Excellent. So good. Something to keep you hanging. Come on back to. Awesome. Before we finally go, is there anything maybe that I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention before we close it up?
I feel like that was probably summed it all up. I mean,
amazing.
It's I think just encouraging people to love our not so furry or feathered out there, and having at least, I guess the one thing I always have people as a takeaway is I'm not asking you to love them. I'm just asking you to respect them. That's it. I'm like, you don't have to go out and buy one as a pet. I'm not telling you that. I just want you to respect that they have a place in our ecosystem and in our world, and just respect that. That's it. So that's it for the takeaway on that one, I guess.
Good. So give just a little bit more love and or at least respect to those reptiles that are, so hardy and just doing what they can to live in this really difficult, like changing landscape that is so hard for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Kim, thank you so much for your time. You have such a crazy schedule, and it means a lot that you took a bit of time to talk to me. And everybody listening, if you can go ahead and donate, that'd be great to Swamp Girl Adventures. All the links will be below. If not, just give that a follow. That is always a good way of showing support. And Kim, thank you so much. And before I close off today, I just got to give my first big shout out to my first Patreon, who is a huge supporter of my SciComm journey. It's Rob Nelson. Thanks, Rob, so much for always being there and helping me move along and being my first member. And if anybody else wants to go check that out, it's also linked in the show notes. And yeah, have a great whatever time of day that you're listening to this now. And until next time, bye. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end of the episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you head to the show notes, check out the links of things I might have mentioned in the show, go follow us on social media, and yes, do @ me. I'd love to hear from you, what you think, if you want to be a guest with me, if you have suggestions for future episodes, that would be great. Other than that, we do have a Patreon link as well below if you're feeling like helping support the show, and I can't wait to see you around for next episode. Thanks, bye.